Epic Mickey. Released back in the Wii days, this game was one of the most interesting games on the console and was received fairly positively. But after the release of its sequel and 3DS spin-off, Disney shut down the developer of the series and cancelled many of the spin-offs and sequels the game was planned to get. So what happened here? Money. After Epic Mickey 2 sold much less than its predecessor, Disney decided that it would be best to go ahead and put it out of its misery. But this begs the question, did the series fail because the games were just bad? Or was it just that people lost interest in the series after the first game? Starting with the original Epic Mickey, this game is a 3D platformer that uses a lot of pointer controls. The story starts off with Mickey traveling through a mirror into Yen Sid's lab where he finds this miniature world Yen Sid had created and immediately begins to mess with it before making a huge mess and ruining the world before running off not to get caught. After this, years go by and Mickey mostly forgets about what happened and moves on. But then a giant inky hand comes out of the mirror and brings Mickey into the world he accidentally destroyed. And after escaping the castle that he was trapped in by the inky creature and the Mad Doctor, the game begins. While most of this game is still controlled using traditional buttons, you spend a lot of time using the paintbrush, which is what the pointer is used for. You can also do the spin attack from Mario Galaxy if you shake the Wii remote, like in Mario Galaxy. The painting mechanic is basically this game's big selling point. You can use paint to restore the world and make things like platforms to jump on, or you can use thinner to destroy parts of the world or even uncover secrets. This gimmick takes up a lot of the game, and most solutions to any puzzles or quests have something to do with using paint or thinner. You control the paintbrush by using the Wii Remote's pointer to aim where you want to paint, and use the B button to use paint, or the Z button to use thinner. I think that this is a pretty good use of the Wii's motion controls, as the whole game doesn't depend on them to do simple actions like moving or jumping. Games that do things like that often end up getting very frustrating and annoying to deal with. Pointer controls are what the Wii Remote did best, so this game using those doesn't feel too frustrating. Also, painting and thinning things in this game can actually feel pretty good to do. You don't have to be super accurate or cover an entire object for it to work, you just have to hit it with enough paint or thinner and watch as it spreads across the object. This mechanic also plays a pretty large role in the game's combat, which is pretty unique to this game. This game has two types of enemies that you have to deal with. You have the blots, which are the minions of the Shadow Blot, and the Beetleworks, which are animatronics created by the Mad Doctor. When dealing with the blot enemies, you have two different ways you can handle them. You can spray them with paint to convert them to your side and have them attack the other enemies, or you can spray them with thinner and just go ahead and get rid of them fully. Painting enemies can help you in taking out larger hordes of enemies, but if they get attacked enough and lose their paint, then they go right back to attacking you. So if you just want them gone and don't want to deal with them anymore, thinning may be your preferred option. This adds a very cool component to the combat and can really affect how you approach certain situations. The Beetleworks, on the other hand, are usually tougher to take down, but have a set way that you have to do it. Each Beetleworks has a protective set of armor around them, which changes their look depending on what area you're in, which I thought was pretty cool. You have to use thinner to remove the armor off of them, and then use your spin attack on their weak point to take them out. I found that these enemies were the tougher ones to deal with most of the time, but offered less variety in how you could take them down. But having two enemy types in combination with each other allowed for more interesting fights, as you have to switch your strategies depending on which enemy you are dealing with at the time. As far as the non-painting controls go, this game overall feels pretty good to play. While you can't do anything too crazy or complex like you could in, say, a 3D Mario, the game does a good job of making sure that what you can do feels good. Jumping feels good, and the spin attack doesn't feel too annoying to pull off. It's still just really nice that all of the normal platforming and movement uses button controls, as it makes everything feel really nice. But in case you haven't noticed, with the nunchuck plugged in, the Wii Remote still only has one joystick. So how do you control the camera? C. So if you want to move the camera in this game, you have to press the C button and it automatically positions the camera to whichever way you are facing, which honestly isn't the worst solution out there, but it's still not ideal. But even with this, the camera itself is just not the greatest. It can oftentimes get stuck in places that make it hard for you to see, and it can get a little frustrating, but it definitely wasn't a deal breaker because I was able to adjust to it pretty quickly. Okay, we have talked about the boring things like game mechanics and whatever for a while now, so let's get into why I personally really enjoy this game. If any of you watching this video know anything about the series, then you know that this game's reputation mostly lies with its art direction and really cool concept. The game takes place in Wasteland, which is where all forgotten cartoon characters go after their age of relevancy is past. This means that the world is filled with all kinds of different old cartoon characters that were either forgotten or never used. The developers of this game were given access to the Disney archive, meaning that they could dig through and find all kinds of cool ideas and characters to use. Like the Gremlins, who are basically main characters throughout this game, come from an abandoned concept found in the archive. But the standout character of the bunch is obviously Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. This was one of Walt Disney's original creations, even predating Mickey Mouse, but the license was lost to Universal, meaning that Disney could not use the character. But after regaining the rights to Oswald not long before this game was made, Oswald would appear as one of the main characters. Oswald is one of the coolest characters in this game, not just because of the fact that he's the forgotten Mickey Mouse predecessor, but also because I think they handle his character in a really cool way. He's pretty bitter at Mickey for a majority of the game because he practically replaced him and got all kinds of fame that he never had. But to me, the Forgotten Toons aren't even the coolest part of this world. You see, this whole world was made as a replica of Disneyland, and because of the thinner disaster Mickey caused, a lot of the rides and lands are broken or abandoned. I love this idea as it allows you to go through familiar locations from the parks, but there are also dark versions of them that have been destroyed. The first section of the game takes place in It's a Small World, and you end the section by fighting the creepy clock tower from the ride. This game is just filled with so many cool locations from the parks, and they're made even cooler by the abandoned and broken look the game goes for. You even get to fight Pete Tronic, who is Pete but dressed like a Tron character, on top of Space Mountain, which is just fun. There's a part where to get to Tomorrow City, which is this game's version of Tomorrowland, you have to raise the Nautilus from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I could go on and on about all the references of the parks and other media, but for the sake of time, we're going to cut it short. Another gimmick that plays a large part in the game is the morality system. For most tasks you have in the game, you have two ways of completing them: the paint path or the thinner path. The paint path usually involves fixing something or helping the person that gave you the quest. The thinner path usually involves breaking something or making a decision that would be seen as evil. What's really cool about this is that depending on the way you choose to do things, the way you play through the game can change. A lot of the time, the actions you take directly affect how you play through a certain mission and can make things easier or harder for you. A lot of the time, taking the paint path would require you to do more work in the moment, but would often reward you with things like collectibles or characters that will help you out later on. But many times, if you took the thinner path, it would be easier in the moment, but ultimately have consequences. I think this is a great way to incentivize multiple playthroughs, as each of them could be pretty different from one another. Since this game has so many locations you can visit, obviously you need a way to get to them all. This is where the projectors come in, as they are the way you get from place to place. When you enter Projector, you get thrown into a 2D level stylized after an old cartoon. These parts can be fun and are pretty cool to look at, but the only problem is that once you clear them, if you want to go back to where you were before, you have to go through the whole thing again. And this game requires you to go back and forth between locations a lot, so this got old pretty fast. Despite this game having quite a few flaws and feeling like it isn't as good as it could be, I still had a really fun time with it, and despite some of the negative things I've heard, I'm pretty excited to check out the sequel. Epic Mickey 2 is like Epic Mickey, but more. I feel like that is something that is important to say before you really get into this game, because at the end of the day, it really isn't all that different from the first one. When this game came out, instead of being a Wii exclusive, this game came out on all platforms at the time. But I'll just be sticking to the Wii version because that's what I have. So at the beginning of this game, we see Wasteland after it was restored in the ending of the last game. But now there are huge earthquakes ravaging the land and causing all kinds of problems. The Mad Doctor from the last game returns and says that he has reformed and is here to help now. Mickey is then summoned back into Wasteland to help with the quakes, and that's about it for now. Oh yeah, so we also have full voice acting now, which is pretty nice. Also, for some reason, the Mad Doctor sings in every cutscene he is in. Some people don't like this. I don't really think it's that big of a deal. This game only really has one major gameplay difference over the original, which is the addition of another controllable character in the form of Oswald. He can fly and use electricity to stun enemies or power machinery, but if you're not playing co-op and don't have an actual person controlling him, you can have a few problems. When playing single player, you cannot control Oswald directly, but rather tell him what to do using the minus button, and most of the time he does what he's supposed to do, but other times, he just kinda does whatever. Also, he can teleport to you when he is far away, but he just chooses not to a lot of the time, and you just have to sit and wait for him to slowly make his way over to you. Honestly, I think this could have easily been fixed if instead of pressing the minus button to tell him what to do, you instead pressed it to switch characters and control him directly, kind of like in Luigi's Mansion 3. While I think this mechanic isn't as good as it could have been, I actually still enjoyed that it was here as it allowed the game to change things up a little bit. As far as combat goes, this game is once again very similar to the last, except we have some of the new things Oswald brings to the table. But the biggest addition is that we now have a new enemy type called the Blotworks, which are a combination of Blots and Beetleworks from the last game. With these enemies, you have to attack them and expose their weak point, so that then you can attack the Blot inside with either paint or thinner to take it out or convert it to your side. This is an enemy type that I think helps mix things up a little bit, but they can be a little frustrating because it can be hard to hit their weak points. The main problem I have with this game is that it tries to add a lot, which is very commendable, but in exchange for that, a lot of the problems present in the first game, like the camera, which is still kind of annoying, you still have to play through the whole projector level multiple times to go back and forth between certain places, and the occasional glitch are still here. But overall, the game still plays pretty decently, and I still had a good time. As far as the theming goes, there aren't really any new characters, so not too much going on there, and most of the level themes are either reused or not as interesting as some of the ones in the original. Blot Alley and Autotopia sort of stand out to me, but most of the others blend together. But overall, I'm still a big fan of the theme of Broken Disneyland, but I ultimately think that they could have done more with it in this game. Like, maybe we could have explored a messed up version of one of the other parks, but overall, I was fine with how it looked, and there was still some really cool parts. You know, usually with two games like this, I have a definitive answer on which one I prefer, but here I think both games have some major strengths and some major flaws, and I can say that I think I liked both pretty equally. And I really wish that the series would continue in some way, but my guess is that Disney probably won't let that happen. But hey, we still have one more game to cover, and I'll be honest, I didn't beat it. Not because it was really bad or anything, I think I was just getting a little tired of Mickey Mouse games. This game was a 3DS exclusive and was basically one big reference to the old Mickey games on Sega Genesis. This game has you exploring the Castle of Illusion, which has a bunch of locations from different Disney movies inside of it. This game abandons the whole Forgotten Tune gimmick of the other games, and in my opinion, it makes the game much less interesting. This game is much more generic Disney than the other games, which offered a darker take on the Disney world. Your little helper companion isn't even Gus anymore, it's just Jiminy Cricket. As far as gameplay goes, this game plays fine, and like I said, I haven't played the whole game, so I can't fully speak on its quality, but it seems like a decent 2D platformer. Man, these games are actually pretty good. The developers also seemed extremely passionate about these games as well, which makes the series' ultimate fate all the more sad. With the first game, it was obvious that it would be a success. It was the most recognizable character of all time on a console everyone had. But by the time its sequel came out, most people had moved on from the Wii, and most players on the other platforms this game was on probably didn't care too much about Mickey Mouse. I would really like to see this series return in some way, like maybe a remake of the original, because I really think that this series deserves a second chance. Probably won't happen though.